somehow the Campbells managed to ensure that Sweeney died without lawful issue. And I'm fairly sure that they did something, because we know for a fact that they were at Otter 11 weeks after this deal that had been done in Perth. The Campbells turned up in the McEwen's homeland and got Sweeney McEwen to sign up to something that was a deal that was even worse than what the king had suggested, by which even if he had a lawful heir, then the Campbells would still inherit a sizable portion of the barony. And there's no question that, you know, there was some force brought to bear when that deal was signed. So that's how they came to lose their lands in Cowell, because obviously when Sweeney McEwen died, there was no lawful heir. I wonder if maybe they did something like ordain him as a priest, because if you're a priest, you can have heirs, but they can't really be lawful heirs, or marry him to a woman that they knew was, you know, a barren woman, so that he couldn't have children by his wife, or something like that. So anyway, Sweeney dies after 61 years, and of course the whole political scenery has changed by then, but the deeds that were signed back in the 1430s still stand, and so the McEwens have to leave their homeland. Now, this is where we get onto what a Scottish clan is, because Sweeney McEwen and his immediate family are the obvious kind of centre of the clan. The clan extends to everyone underneath them. So all the people that are working the land and so on are all counted as part of the clan, because they're living under the protection of the McEwens. And so they can have the clan name McEwen, and if you wanted to identify them by a clan name, you'd call them McEwens. And this is a kind of, in medieval Scotland, this was a sort of special relationship that the clan chief had with everyone on his lands. And it was something that was honoured by both sides. And clan means children. And the Mac bit of all these clan names just means son of. And Sweeney was Sweeney McEwen, not because his father was Ewan, but because his great-great-grandfather was called Ewan. And so you could also call him, I'm just trying to remember what his own father was called. I think his own father was called John or Jon. And so you could call him Sweeney McEwen, which sounds terribly like McEwen, I know, but they are in fact distinct names. And so there's various different ways of identifying people, which I won't go into in any more detail right now. But when the clan left, the people who worked on the land weren't going to leave. That was their land. They worked it before the McEwens got there. And so they stayed on, but equally, if the Campbells had come in now, then they weren't going to identify themselves as McEwens anymore. And so that's why I think if you go to the Cowell Peninsula today, you don't find much trace of the McEwens, because although when they were there, lots of the local inhabitants would have called themselves McEwen, when they left, they stopped calling themselves McEwen. It was no longer what they were. So that's kind of where the Ewings originally came from. When they got to Lennox, of course, the name changes to Ewing, which is, I think the ing ending is more or less just local pronunciation. and the loss of the Mac is actually not really a loss at all, because we think of all these names as surnames. We're so used to dealing in surnames that we have difficulty in thinking outside that way. But a clan name is, of course, quite different to a surname, and as we've seen with the farmers that immediately drop the name as soon as the clan leaves. It's simply an identification of loyalty, and so the name of the clan is Clan Ewing, which means the children of Ewing. If you called it Clan Mac Ewing, that wouldn't make much sense, because it would be the children of the son of Ewing, except it would be grammatically incorrect as well. It should be Clan Vic Ewing if it's the children of the son of Ewing. Anyway, that's more or less what I want to say. I'll be asking for questions in a moment, but before I finish that bit, I want to add my thanks to the Ewing Family Association for bringing me here, and to our absent friend Bill, who was the one who had the idea of getting me here in the first place. And I also want to hand out some books that you can have a look at. I'll be selling them after questions. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask? And I'll try to talk about how I see the early history of it, or about the clan status, or anything along those lines.
Thor, I think I'd like you to say just a couple of words about some of the other Ewing lines, including the Bissettes and maybe some from the northeast. I think there were some Perthshire Ewings, but there were some other nests of Ewings unrelated to these folks.
Yeah, I suspect that none of them, or hardly any of them, ended up with the name Ewing. I think the name Ewing goes back always to MacEwan of Otter. And the closely related group, as I say, I think is the Chiefly line. But there are lots of other Ewings that represent other descendants of that clan. But there are at least two other MacEwan origins in Scotland, so that not all MacEwans are one clan. In the north of Scotland, there was a bunch called the Bissetts, and the Bissetts were actually a Norman family, and they got accused of the murder of the Lord of Galloway. Whether or not they killed him is really an open question. But anyway, they were accused of the murder, and although the king actually really liked the Bissetts and didn't want to get rid of them, he felt that his own position would become untenable unless he exiled the Bissetts. So the Bissetts fled to Ulster, to Glenarm in the Glens of Antrim, and their leader there was John Bissett, in Gaelic Jon Bissett, and so they become known as the MacEwans, sons of John. And around Glenarm there are still MacEwans in Ulster. But in the days of Robert the Bruce, Edward Bruce led an expedition to Ireland in which he was trying to conquer Ireland in the name of Scotland, so that there'd be a kind of pan-Gaelic confederation to fight against the Plantagenet kings in England. And after he'd been there for a while, he seems to have won over quite a lot of the Anglo-Irish nobility, and among them were the MacEwan Bissetts. And so they, although at first they turned up at the battle against him. They kind of joined up with him in the end, and so they were fighting for Scotland. And around the same time, actually, you know the story of Robert the Bruce in the cave with the spider? That spider in the cave, well, it probably never happened, but if it did happen, it would have been on an island that Bruce was being sheltered by the Bissets on, by the McEwen Bissets. And he was sheltered on Rathlin Island, and if you visit Rathlin Island, then you can see the cave, which is called Bruce's Cave. The spider's gone. But anyway, they, after the Scottish expedition in Ireland had failed, they went back to Scotland with another local family, the Agnews, and the Agnews and the McEwens had been neighbours in Ireland, and so they were in Scotland too. The Agnews took Loughnall Castle, and the McEwens took Wigmore Castle. But because medieval spelling didn't really allow for the writing McEwen, they come out as the McEwens. And so they've always been grouped in with the McEwens of Otter. But really it makes much more sense to imagine that this is a completely separate family. And again, you know, when you have a story like that, it all seems to hold water, but I always like to have something extra to kind of bring it round from a different direction. The crest of the Bisset family is the stump of an oak tree with green branches sprouting out of it, and the motto is Reveresco. And that is acknowledged today by McEwens in Scotland as the crest of the McEwen family. And all the earliest records that I can find for that, which again is through this book that I keep mentioning, by R.S.T. McEwen, Clan Ewan, Some Records of Its History. All the early records seem to be in the south of Scotland, mainly from Galloway. So I think here, you know, you've got the same crest coming through from the Bisset family to the McEwens, and that seems to confirm that that's where that lot came from. And then up around Perth, there's another bunch of McEwens, and they are almost certainly from the Camerons, because there's a branch of the Camerons which is called Sliabh McEwen, because they are descended from a Ewan McEwen Cameron. And when you look at 17th and 16th century records, then they're very often called McEwens, sometimes McEwen alias Cameron or something like that, so that you can see that they were using the name McEwen quite regularly. And either that bunch or another bunch of Camerons are referred to 2 or 3 times as Clan Ewan in records which are preserved in the Campbell archive. So they were definitely going by the name of McEwen at that time.